There's another group of people who also have that power. We call them crazy people. Right? If you're a sociopath and you'd like to start a cult, it's really handy to have the power to convince people in your vicinity to believe something as if it was true that is not, strictly speaking, actually true. Don't try this at home. The issue is if you're in the reality distortion field, how do you know if you're following a brilliant visionary or a crazy person? Yes?
Is it a question about the problem or the solution that you have a distortion about?
Well, entrepreneurs are gifted about distortion about everything. I mean, problem, solution, but also many, many other things. I mean, read any account of the really great entrepreneurs at work, and you'll be like, how did they convince people to give them money for that? How did they convince people to give up their really good jobs to go join them on this crazy quest? The problem is that the stories we read tend to be about the crazy, brilliant entrepreneurs that made it, and not the crazy, crazy people who got people to leave their perfectly good job and ruin their families and relationships to go off on a quest that led them nowhere. I mean, I've both been led on that quest and have led people on that quest, and it's really unpleasant both ways. And in fact, the whole idea of Lean Startup is to help us understand whether as entrepreneurs we are actually making progress or wasting people's time. The issue is that Deming had a very famous phrase in manufacturing. He said the customer is the most important part of the production line. By which he meant the way you gauge whether something is value creating or not is you simply ask yourself, does the customer care about this aspect of the product? But I hope now the problem with that statement is immediately evident for entrepreneurs. Who's the customer? Who are we going to ask? In Lean, the whole idea is that if you're making stuff, then you know you're making progress, and if you're not, you're not. But if we as entrepreneurs have a pathological tendency to build stuff that nobody wants, what does it matter if we do it on time and on budget? Who cares if it's high quality? Who cares if it has extra features? Nobody wants it. Every bit of energy that goes into building a product that nobody wants is actually a form of waste. And that's because as entrepreneurs, we live in this world of the unknown solution, unknown problem and unknown solution. And so, here's another one of our gurus. This is Steve Blank. I know many of you have his book probably with you tonight. I hope you carry it with you everywhere. Who invented something called customer development, which is a lean process for trying to figure out what problem are we actually trying to solve. Right? How do we know if there actually are other people just like me who will want this thing or not? In parallel with an agile solution team who's trying to figure out how do we actually build a product that conforms to our current hypothesis. These two teams together comprise Lean Startup. This is the feedback loop that really matters. And what's key about this chart is the new unit of progress, validated learning. When I was doing a startup called InView, it was a 3D avatar social networking startup, it turned out well, so I did X, then I made money. If you do X, you'll make money too. Maybe. If I really did X. If X actually caused those things, if I actually made money, right, all those things. So ignore that part of it. Let me just tell you this little anecdote. We had this really clever strategy for InView. We wanted to build an instant messaging product. This is circa 2004. And we wanted to kind of be the next AOL, back when that was still cool. And it all dates us a little bit. But instant messaging was the hot social technology at that time, and we wanted to enter the instant messaging market. Everybody knows that IM is a network effects business, yes? So the value of the network increases with the square of the number of participants. That's Metcalfe's law. Nod if you're familiar with that. Okay, at least some people are nodding. And therefore, IM has high switching costs, because if you were to try to get somebody to leave one IM network and go to another one, they have to bring all their friends with them, right? Like yes. And therefore, IM is an industry with high barriers to entry. You can't just bring a new IM network to market because everybody already has an IM client and they're not going to want to switch to yours. Therefore, you'll never get your network effect started. Therefore, you're doomed. So we did that analysis at the whiteboard, and we're feeling daunted. And we had a brilliant strategic insight. Let's build an instant messaging add-on that will interoperate with all existing IM networks and bring our core 3D avatar technology to the instant messaging market. And that was classic good management, because our core competency was building this cool 3D avatar communication system, and there's no reason for us to be worried about building IM protocols and buddy lists and all that stuff. Plus, the IM add-on strategy is inherently viral, because how do you use the product? You invite someone else through IM to join join your 3D avatar chat. In order for you to do it, they have to do it too. And therefore, we had this brilliant strategy to avoid the switching costs, to avoid the barriers to entry, to build it inherently viral. Anyone like that plan? Sound good? Yeah, sounds good, right? I teach this for MBAs. They love it. Now, this is the part where they're I don't know what the hell this guy's been talking about, but now finally something that sounds good. That sounds smart. The only problem with that strategy is that every single thing I said about it is 100% wrong. Okay? IM is not a network effects business. contrary to what most people think. There are not high switching costs for people to switch IAM clients, and therefore there's not a big barrier to entry. And IAM add-ons are not inherently viral. I'll explain why. Who uses instant messaging the heaviest? Anyone know? What age are they? Yeah, 17-year-olds have the highest usage of IAM. Certainly true, I guess by now they're probably all on Facebook, but certainly in 2004 it was teenagers. So we would bring a teenager in to like do a usability test. We would say, okay, we're gonna have you download this instant messaging add-on. They'd be like, well, what? Is it an IAM network? No, it's an IAM add-on that interoperates with all your networks. And I look at you like, why would I want that? I don't understand what you're talking about. No deal. He's like, listen, trust me, just try it, you'll like it. Okay, we're paying you to do this usability test, so all right. They'll do it. Download the product. They would customize their avatar. They'd be like, ooh, I like the avatar clothing. They really like the avatar part of it. And they get into the product. We say, okay, it's time for you to invite one of your friends. And they'd be like, no thanks. Like, no, we're paying you for the usability test. So they're like, no, I will not do it. No. See, we didn't understand that teenagers have a definition of mission critical. Right? Mission critical software for a teenager is pretty much rule number one. Do not make me look stupid in front of my friends. That's about the worst thing you can do for a teenager. And we're telling them, we want you to invite your friends to something that you don't know if it's cool or not yet. But trust us, it'll be fine. And lo and behold, they wouldn't do it. And we went through a zillion iterations trying to figure out how could we get them to do our brilliant, inherently viral strategy. And they just didn't want to do it. It's like we would give them a copy of the business plan, and I'd read this and reason all the reasons why you should do it. And they were like, no, guys, no thanks. And finally, they'd always ask these questions like, why don't you just let me have my own buddy list? And we'd be like, you don't want your own buddy list because then you need to bring your friends over. They're like, I like that part. What? I like when I get to tell my friends about a new IAM network, that's actually really a fun thing to do. Recruit them to come over, that's neat. Oh, interesting. But they're like, but even still, like, you would have to run yet another IAM program. You don't have to download a whole nother network. And they're like, why? What's the big deal? I already run 7. And we're like, there are 7 IAM networks? No clue. And of course, at that time, this is 2004, so they're already starting to be like, and like, shouldn't you really be worried about MySpace, not IAM? And we're like, my what? Right? And they're like, oh, old man, what are you? Who are you? Why are you talking about? It was just, our conception of who the customer was could not have been more wrong. Okay, so listen, that happens all the time with startups. And so we figured that out, we pivoted, everything turned out great. Here's the thing I want you to really sympathize with. See, my job at the time was the CTO of this company. What that meant for a 5-person company is I actually wrote the software. I personally spent, I don't know, 6 months of my life writing how many tens of thousands of lines of code, I don't know, to do IAM interoperability with like 10 networks. And that was like a major accomplishment. I'd done all agile, so it was well documented, if I do say so myself, and well factored, and good unit test coverage, blah, blah, blah. And then we all had to throw it all away. Right? All the IAM interoperability code had to be thrown away. Because it turned out IAM needed to be a standalone IAM network, and all that work had turned out to be waste. And I felt a little bit betrayed. I was like, I was promised if I did agile, there'd be no more waste in my development environment, but of course, the biggest waste in product development is building something that nobody wants. So I felt bad, okay, I was depressed. My work got thrown away, and I asked myself this question. Would the company have been just as well off if I had spent the last 6 or 9 months on a beach, somewhere on a tropical island, drinking Mai Tais, as it was with me killing myself writing the software? After all, at the end, we threw the software away, so did I even really need to be there? Anyone have an opinion about that? Was the company better off with me there or on a beach?
Were you?
What's that?
Were you?
What's that?
Were you better off?
Well, was I better off? Yeah, sure, I was better off because I learned something. Yeah.
Could they have done all this customer experimentation if you hadn't written that?
Very well said. Of course, it's exactly what I said to myself. The combination of these two comments. If we hadn't done the past 6 months of work and experimentation, we would not have learned this important thing about customers, namely that they really didn't like our whole strategy, which is pretty valuable information for a startup. So I made myself feel better that way. Incidentally, any of you who've actually worked in a big company know that when you're a general manager and you fail to do something, the last refuge, the last possible excuse you can use is like, well, but I still learned. We learned a lot from it, right? In regular management, you claim you learned something, you're fired. Because that means you either failed to plan or you failed to execute. Equally bad sins, both of which should get you fired, yeah? Could I have learned it sooner? Boy, I got a crowd here primed with the answer already. Of course, that's the thing that made me depressed again, right? My delight was short-lived because, of course, I had this question. Well, hold on. If the purpose of the last 6 months of my life was to learn this important thing about customers, why did it take 6 months? Did it really require 40,000 lines of code? Right? Couldn't I have learned the same thing in 20,000 lines? Remember, I had a product that customers refused to use. at all. So, like if I had just put up a landing page asking them to download it, I would have had the same